You say you fear being alone, but what you truly fear is meeting yourself in the silence. Because in the silence there is no one left to impress, no mirror reflecting who you think you should be, no laughter to hide behind, no distractions to numb you. Just you unfiltered, unraveled, and undeniable. And that is terrifying. Not because you are weak, but because the world taught you to build your identity out of everything but your truth. It taught you that your worth lives in other people's eyes, that your safety lives in relationships, that your joy lives in connection, but no one told you how to survive the moment those things disappear. So, when the noise fades, when the room empties, when the messages stop coming and the attention dries up, you panic. Not because you're truly alone, but because you've never learned how to stand in your own presence without flinching. You fear being alone because you confuse loneliness with truth. You fear being alone because the silence echoes with all the things you've buried. You fear being alone because your true self, the wild, unfiltered self you locked away, still lives there, still waits for you. Carl Jung warned us. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And that's what solitude demands. Not just acceptance of your surface self, but confrontation with your shadow. The part of you that doubts, that judges, that aches, that remembers the betrayals you thought you buried, that still bleeds from the wounds you dressed with distraction. In solitude, the masks fall. The achiever, the pleaser, the performer, the one who always knows what to say, the one who never cracks, gone. And what's left is what's real. Not polished, not perfect, but whole. You see, the fear of being alone is not about isolation. It's about exposure. You're afraid of what will rise in the quiet. The grief you suppressed, the rage you swallowed, the longing you neglected, the dreams you postponed. You're afraid because solitude forces honesty. It strips away everything you used to avoid yourself. But that stripping, that's where your freedom begins. Because beneath the fear is power. Raw, unclaimed, untouched by opinion. The power of knowing you are not dependent on anyone else's presence to feel your own. The power of no longer needing a witness to feel worthy. The power of becoming your own sanctuary. When you face the silence, not just endure it, but enter it, something begins to change. You start to see that solitude is not punishment. It's pilgrimage. A sacred return to the self. Not the self you constructed to survive, the self you were before the world told you who to be. In solitude, you don't just hear your thoughts, you meet your soul. You hear the voice that's been whispering beneath the noise all along, the voice that remembers what you wanted before you were conditioned to want something else. The voice that still believes in you, even when you've forgotten how. This voice does not shout. It doesn't demand. It waits. And when you finally sit long enough to hear it, you realize how loud the world has been. You realize how often you've traded truth for connection, peace for popularity, alignment for acceptance. You realize the real abandonment wasn't from others, it was from yourself. And that realization, it stings, but it also saves. Because you cannot reclaim what you're not willing to confront. You want confidence? It's born in the fire of solitude. You want clarity? It rises from the ashes of your distractions. You want real love? Then you must first learn how to sit with your own. Because the truth is this, you will never fear being alone again once you no longer fear yourself. And that begins the moment you stop running. When you stop filling your time with noise. When you stop reaching for another person to validate your worth. When you stop begging the world to distract you from the most important work you'll ever do, the work of remembering who you are. This fear, this ache, this void, they are not curses. They are thresholds. And when you cross them, you don't just find peace, you find power, not the kind that dominates, the kind that roots, the kind that cannot be taken away, because it was never given by the world. It was born in the fire of your own becoming. So if you find yourself alone, do not rush to fill the space. Let it stretch. Let it echo. Let it show you what's been waiting beneath the noise. Because somewhere in that silence, buried beneath the masks and memories, your true self is still waiting. Not to be rescued, to be remembered. And when you remember, when you rise, you will know this. The fear of being alone was never a fear of loneliness. It was a fear of meeting the most powerful, most honest, most sacred version of yourself. And now that meeting has begun. And in that meeting, something irreversible awakens. Not a new identity to wear, but the one you left behind when you chose safety over truth. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with a stillness so profound it frightens everything false within you. A stillness that demands no audience, no applause, no performance, only presence. You begin to see how much of your life was built in response, not in intention. How many of your choices were compromises disguised as diplomacy? How many of your relationships were places where you contorted yourself into compatibility? How often you diluted your truth to be digestible? And now, in the silence of being alone, you see it all. And you begin to forgive yourself, not because you were wrong to adapt, but because you are finally ready to evolve. Solitude becomes the sanctuary where your soul untangles. The lies you told yourself just to survive start to dissolve. I'm okay. This is enough. I don't need more. They were never truths. They were shields. But shields grow heavy when you no longer need to fight for your place. And now, you don't fight. You reclaim. Piece by piece, you gather what was lost. The creativity stifled by conformity, the passion smothered by politeness, the boundaries bulldozed by fear. You begin to take up space not in arrogance, but in alignment. You begin to speak not to be right, but to be real. You begin to breathe not as a reflex, but as a ritual. This is what happens when you stop fearing your own company. You become dangerous not to others, but to the lies that once governed you. Because a person who no longer fears solitude is a person who can no longer be manipulated. You stop chasing what doesn't nourish you. You stop apologizing for your depth. You stop negotiating your value in rooms that never deserved you. And people will notice. Some will call you distant, others detached. But those who understand the ones who have walked through their own fire, they will see you not as cold but clear. They will feel the weight of your presence not because it demands attention, but because it refuses to be anything less than truth. This is what solitude gives you. A foundation no earthquake can shake. A voice no crowd can drown. A peace that isn't circumstantial, it's cellular. And from this place, you begin to choose differently. Not from scarcity, from sovereignty. You no longer beg for love. You offer it freely, but only where it can breathe. You no longer perform to be chosen. You choose yourself, and the rest is resonance. You no longer fear endings. You honor them because every ending carved space for a deeper beginning. This is what it means to come home to yourself, to find in the echo of your own heartbeat everything you thought the world owed you. To realize that the love you sought was never in them. It was in your own capacity to see, to hold, to honor yourself without shame. Solitude is not your enemy. It is your return to center. And when you live from that center, everything changes. Your relationships soften because they are no longer survival strategies. Your decisions sharpen because they no longer require consensus. Your days become sacred not because they are perfect, but because they are yours. Unfiltered, uncompromised. unapologetically aligned, you walk through the world not needing to be filled, but overflowing. And in that overflow, you become the very thing you once searched for in others. The home, the peace, the presence. This is what happens when you stop fearing being alone. You discover the truth. You were never alone. You were just waiting to meet the version of yourself that no longer needed the world to complete you. And now that you've met them, the version of you that stands unshaken, not because nothing hurts, but because nothing hidden remains, you will never abandon them again. Because to abandon yourself now would be a betrayal so loud, it would echo through every hollow success. You've tasted too much truth to return to silence. You've touched the edges of your own soul, and no counterfeit will ever suffice again. You no longer fear solitude. You crave it. You protect it. Because in that solitude, you've built something sacred, not a fortress to hide in, but a sanctuary to come alive in. From here, your standards change. You don't settle for connection built on convenience. You don't trade your energy for proximity. You don't say yes when your entire being whispers no. And the world might not understand. They will ask why you're different. Why you walk away from noise that once thrilled you. Why you turn down invitations that used to validate you. Why you'd rather be alone on a quiet path than accompanied in chaos. But you won't explain, because some things aren't meant to be explained, only embodied. And this embodiment, it's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's not an announcement. It's a knowing. A steady fire beneath your skin. A rhythm in your chest that says, this is who I am now. Not because you became someone else, but because you remembered who you were before you were told who to be. This remembrance, it costs everything false, but it gives you back your life. The real one, not the life you perform for approval. The one you live from the inside out. The one that pulses with meaning, not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. You no longer fear being alone, because you are no longer a stranger to your own soul. You've sat with your demons, you've faced the shadows, you've tasted the bitter and made peace with the ache. And what remains is real, unshakable, unmovable, yours. So when the world spins, let it. When people leave, bless them. When the noise rises, return to stillness. You've learned how to come home, and more importantly, how to stay there. This is the kind of power that cannot be taken, only remembered. The kind that doesn't waver when the external shifts. The kind that whispers even in the darkness, I am whole. Because the real reason you feared being alone was never about solitude. It was about the truth, waiting in the silence. And now that you've faced it, you're not just unafraid, you are free. Free, not the kind of freedom sold in slogans or stitched into flags, but the kind of freedom that lives deep in your chest. The kind that doesn't need to shout, because it no longer asks for permission. The kind that walks into rooms without wondering if it belongs. That breathes without seeking approval. That creates without performing. That loves deeply, wildly, quietly, without losing itself in the process. This freedom is not loud because it doesn't have to be. It's a still, unwavering truth that you are enough, not because of what you do, but because of who you are when everything else is stripped away. It's the freedom to stay in your own presence, to hold space for your pain without rushing to escape it, to cradle your joy without fearing it will be taken, to walk through your life as you are, not who they need you to be, because the self you found in solitude is not fragile. It is fire-forged. It doesn't shatter under judgment. It doesn't dissolve in rejection. It remains constant, honest, holy. And now, everything you touch begins to change. Not because you've become more, but because you've returned to something more ancient than ambition, more enduring than success. You've returned to wholeness. And wholeness is not something you chase. It's something you claim right here, right now, not when they understand, not when they come back, not when the money's better, or the timing's perfect, or the stars align. Now, because now you've remembered there is no void inside you. Only space, sacred, expansive space, waiting to be filled by you, by your own breath, your own truth, your own love. And the fear that once kept you from being alone, it no longer owns you. It's just a memory now, a shadow of a time when you thought your wholeness lived somewhere outside you. But now you know. The silence is not empty. It is full of you. And that is the loudest, strongest, most unstoppable kind of power there is. That power, the power of someone who has met their own soul in the dark and didn't flinch, is unshakable. It radiates without needing to convince. It moves without needing to conquer. It exists as a force, not a performance. You carry that power now, not in your voice, though your voice may grow clearer, not in your stride, though your steps may feel lighter. You carry it in your gaze, unblinking, unhurried, undistracted, in your presence not crowded by need, but anchored in enough. This is what changes the world, though it never announces itself. A person who is no longer ruled by fear, not the fear of being unloved, not the fear of being unseen, and certainly not the fear of being alone. You've cracked the illusion that being alone means being less, that solitude equals absence, that silence is something to fear. You've seen the truth. Being alone is where you meet what is most sacred. The unspoken answers, the forgotten songs, the quiet strength that doesn't scream to be recognized. And the more time you spend there in that sacred stillness, the less you chase. You stop chasing people who only see you partially. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop clinging to what needs effort just to stay breathing. Instead, you become the one who chooses, not from fear, not from lack, from love. Love that begins within and spills outward, not because it's seeking, but because it's overflowing. And yes, some will leave. They always do when the light gets too honest. But others will come. Those who resonate with the truth you've claimed, those who have met their own silence and survived it, they won't need to complete you. They will only want to meet you fully, clearly, fearlessly. And those are the only relationships worth keeping, because they're not built on fear of being alone. They're built on two whole people, choosing each other, not out of desperation, but devotion. This is the shift from needing to be needed to choosing to be seen, from begging for belonging to standing in your sacred self and letting others rise to meet you there or not. Because when you've met yourself in the solitude, when you've walked through the desert of your own silence and discovered water within you, no longer depend on others to quench a thirst that was never theirs to satisfy. You are the well. You are the home. You are the answer to the ache that once haunted your quietest hours. And now you are not afraid. You are free. You are full. You are finally whole. Wholeness isn't the end. It's the beginning. Because once you become whole, you stop waiting for life to start. You stop postponing your joy until conditions are perfect. You stop outsourcing your peace to people who never knew how to hold it. Now, you begin again, but this time from truth, not reaction, not performance, not the ghost of who you thought you had to be, from truth. And truth is magnetic. It draws to you the moments, the people, the purpose that align not with your appearance, but with your essence. And essence, unlike appearance, never fades. It deepens, it roots, It grows wilder with age, and from it you build. You build relationships that breathe. You build work that matters. You build a life that doesn't just look good, but feels like you from the inside out. Because now, you no longer make choices from emptiness. You make them from center. You no longer ask, will this make them stay? You ask, does this keep me true? And that question, that sacred filter, simplifies everything. You stop negotiating your values. You stop tolerating your own betrayal. You stop shrinking in spaces that demand smallness to maintain comfort. Because you know, real love, real joy, real peace, they don't require you to become less. They ask you to become more of what you already are. And now that you've remembered who that is, now that you've unearthed what the world tried to bury, you will never settle again. You've seen too much, felt too deeply, heard too clearly the voice that only speaks when the world is quiet. And that voice is yours. So let it guide you into deeper relationships, into bolder decisions, into a life so full of presence, the past loses its grip and the future bows to your becoming. Because the fear of being alone, it was never about solitude. It was about initiation. It was the gate you had to pass through to come home to yourself. And now, standing on the other side, unmasked, unafraid, unwavering, you understand, you weren't running from loneliness. You were running from your own depth. But now that you've faced it, now that you've lived through the echo chamber of your own silence, you're no longer running. You are becoming. And in that becoming, you are free. Free not just in the poetic sense, not in metaphors or mantras, but in your marrow, in the quiet moments when no one is watching, in the decisions you make without fear of loss, in the way you breathe without apology. This freedom isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself on stages. It hums in your presence. It pulses in your boundaries. It shows up in the calm steadiness of your no, in the radical, uncompromising clarity of your yes. You move through the world no longer asking, will they accept me? You ask, does this mirror my soul? And suddenly you stop needing to be understood by those who only knew the mask. You stop revisiting wounds, hoping someone else will finally apologize. You stop building bridges that always collapse under the weight of one-sided effort. You realize some people were never meant to walk with you past the noise. They were companions for the climb, not the arrival. They loved your potential, not your presence. They held space for your pain, but not your power. And you were always more than what they could see. Now, you see it. And with that sight comes mourning. You grieve the friendships that couldn't hold your truth, the lovers who feared your depth, the mentors who praised your performance, but punished your authenticity. You grieve not because you're broken, but because you're finally whole. And wholeness mourns not what was lost, but what was never real. You make peace with the empty places. You stop demanding them to be full, because you now are full, full of knowing, full of presence, full of a love that no longer chases, but radiates. And that love, it's not something you give out like a currency. It's the way you walk into a room, the way you sit with your silence, the way you hold your joy without dimming it to make others comfortable. You've stopped seeking peace in people who are at war with themselves. You've stopped trying to be enough for those who never saw you to begin with. And in doing so, you've become your own ground. You've become unshakable. And from here, everything shifts. The way you speak, the way you love, the way you live. Because the fear is gone. Not because it disappeared, but because you're no longer enslaved by it. You've walked into the darkest room of your being alone and found not a void, but a voice. your voice. And now it leads. Now it is the compass. Now it is the only truth that matters. Not because it is louder than the world, but because it is finally louder than your doubt. This is what was waiting on the other side of your fear of being alone. Not isolation, not punishment, not lack, but the most sacred, powerful, untouchable truth you'll ever know. You were never afraid of solitude. You were afraid of meeting the version of you that doesn't need saving. And now that you've met them, you will never go back. So now you understand. It was never about loneliness. It was about truth. It was never the absence of others that haunted you. It was the absence of you. And now the haunting ends because you have returned, not as the version the world molded, not as the persona you wore to be loved, but as the truth that was always waiting underneath it all, quiet, patient, eternal. You've walked through your own silence. You've stood in your own fire. And what remains now is not fragile. It is sacred. It is sovereign. It is you, unchained, unmasked, unwavering. You do not fear being alone anymore, because you know you are never truly alone when you are whole within. And now you are whole. And now you are home. And now you are free. Because what is forbidden isn't just tempting, it becomes a mirror reflecting the parts of ourselves we've hidden, repressed, or denied. Carl Jung taught us that the unconscious mind holds the shadow, the aspects of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. When desire is forbidden, it often stems from this shadow, making it more potent and alluring. The forbidden ignites our imagination, not merely because it's off limits, but because it represents the unexplored territories of our psyche. It's not the object of desire itself, but what it symbolizes: freedom, rebellion, authenticity. When we confront these forbidden desires, we are not succumbing to temptation, we are engaging in a dialogue with our inner selves. It's an opportunity to integrate the shadow, to become whole. So, the next time you feel the pull of the forbidden, pause. Ask yourself, what part of me is seeking expression? What truth have I been avoiding? In embracing these questions, we don't just understand our desires, we understand ourselves. And in that understanding lies true freedom. Because desire, at its core, is not about possession. It's about permission. Permission to feel, to want, to remember who you were before shame told you to behave. When something becomes forbidden, it doesn't just become unreachable. It becomes unclaimed truth. And Jung knew this. He saw the forbidden not as evil, but as a signal, a flare shot into the sky by your unconscious, begging to be seen. Why does the off-limits make your heart race? Because it touches a nerve you buried. Because it speaks to the version of you who still burns beneath the skin. The one who was told to sit still, be good, follow the rules, smile nicely. And that version of you never died. They're still in there, wild, watching, waiting for the moment. You drop the performance and let them breathe. That's why forbidden desire feels stronger. Not because it's wrong, but because it's honest, raw, undiluted. A scream in a world addicted to silence. And the more you pretend it's not there, the louder it becomes. Because the psyche cannot be tricked. You can lie to your partner. You can lie to your family. You can even lie to your God. But you cannot lie to the unconscious. It sees everything, and it waits, and it whispers, until the whisper becomes a hunger you can't ignore. And that hunger It's not just for a person, or a touch, or a thrill behind closed doors. It's a hunger for contact with your unlived life. The moments you traded for acceptance. The instincts you buried for approval. The fire you extinguished to fit inside someone else's idea of who you should be. Forbidden desire becomes intoxicating, not because you want to ruin something, but because you want to remember something, something sacred, something wild, something true. And yet, most of us never admit it. We blame it on temptation, on timing, on the chemistry we just couldn't resist. But what if it's not about them at all? What if that forbidden pull is your soul, reaching through the rubble of your repression, begging you to wake up? What if it's the shadow saying, you've silenced me long enough. You've called me dangerous. You've locked me in the basement of your being. But I am you, and I will not die quietly. Jung knew the more you reject your shadow, the more it owns you. It seduces you in the dark. It drags you into secrecy. It turns your hunger into guilt, your curiosity into shame, your truth into betrayal. But the moment you face it, the moment you stop pretending it's not there, that's when everything changes. Because now, desire is no longer forbidden. It's integrated. And when desire is integrated, when it is welcomed out of the shadows and into the light, it loses its grip on you. Not because it disappears, but because it transforms. It becomes a compass, not a curse. A teacher, not a tormentor. A fire that warms. It's not one that burns your life to ash. But this only happens when you stop making desire the villain and start seeing it for what it truly is. Unspoken truth. The forbidden isn't dangerous because it's wrong. It's dangerous because it's honest. And honesty in a dishonest world is always seen as a threat. But you are not built to suppress yourself into safety. You were built to reclaim yourself through truth. And that means you must be willing to look at what you want. Truly want without flinching. Not to act on it recklessly. Not to romanticize chaos. But to know yourself fully without editing your essence to fit someone else's definition of purity. Because what is repressed will always return. Stronger, hungrier, more distorted. But what is integrated, what is seen, named, held, understood, becomes sacred power. It becomes part of your wholeness, your clarity, your alignment. And suddenly, forbidden desire doesn't control you. It guides you. It shows you where you're still asleep, where you've chosen comfort over aliveness, where you've been faithful to your mask, but disloyal to your truth. And if you're brave enough, you use that desire, not to destroy the life you've built, but to rebuild it in a way that includes all of you. Because inclusion of the self, the whole self, is the only real path to freedom. You don't need to act on every impulse, but you need to listen to everyone. You need to ask it, what are you trying to teach me? What am I not admitting to myself? What have I sacrificed on the altar of being good? And if you listen deeply, forbidden desire will reveal this. You have betrayed yourself far more often than you betrayed others. You've said yes when you meant no. You've smiled when you felt dead inside. You've stayed silent in the presence of truth, just to keep the peace. But desire, real desire, is the soul's resistance to self-abandonment. It is the wild within you that refuses to die quietly. It is the whisper that says, there's more to you than this. And that whisper grows louder the longer you ignore it. until one day it screams in the form of temptation, or a midlife unraveling, or a secret you can no longer hide. And you have a choice. Will you continue performing a version of yourself that keeps the world comfortable while your soul rots from starvation? Or will you turn toward the forbidden, not to indulge it, but to integrate it, to reclaim the parts of you that society told you to suppress, to meet your shadow with reverence, not resistance? Because when you do, you become someone no longer ruled by desire, but in conversation with it. And in that conversation, you discover something radical. That desire is not here to ruin you. It's here to reveal you, to show you where you are still asleep in your own life, where you are living by rules that were never yours, where you've replaced passion with politeness, depth with duty, and truth with obedience. And this is the real reason forbidden desire feels so strong. Not because it is wrong, but because it is unlived life, calling your name. It is the echo of your authenticity, lost beneath layers of expectation, craving, resurrection. And when you ignore it, when you push it into the darkness, it becomes louder, more distorted, more destructive. But when you turn to it, when you face it without fear, it becomes your path back to yourself. Not to chaos, not to betrayal, but to truth. The truth that you were never meant to live divided. The truth that fidelity is not just about loyalty to another, but about loyalty to your own soul. Because when you are loyal to yourself, you no longer chase what is forbidden. You embody what is authentic. And from that place, desire loses its power to control you. Because you have nothing to hide, nothing to prove, nothing to seek in the shadows. You've already made peace with your fire. And now you carry it with you, not as a secret, but as a source of light. And that light, that fierce, untamed inner flame, it doesn't need to burn everything down to be real. It just needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be witnessed, not through shame, not through secrecy, but through the eyes of someone who has finally said, I will no longer exile parts of myself just to be accepted. Because the moment you accept all of you, not just the polished, palatable pieces, is the moment forbidden desire loses its grip. Not because it's gone, but because it no longer needs to hide. It has been integrated, transformed, honored, and now it fuels you, not from behind a locked door, but from the center of your being. It becomes clarity, power, creative force, a compass pointing you toward wholeness. You don't need to act out. You don't need to escape. You don't need to betray to feel alive, because you've already returned to the only place you were ever missing from, yourself. And in that return, you realize the desire was never the danger. The danger was forgetting who you are, forgetting the wild, the real, the soul beneath the mask. But now, you remember, and from that memory, you rise, integrated, unashamed, awake to every part of yourself that was once hidden, awake to the truths you silenced just to belong, awake to the ache you mislabeled as weakness, only to discover it was your deepest strength calling you home. And now, you don't just understand why desire feels stronger when it's forbidden. You understand why you couldn't ignore it. Because it was never just about lust. It was about loss. Loss of connection. Loss of aliveness. Loss of the voice inside you that dared to speak before the world taught you to whisper. but no more. Now your desire becomes your prayer, not to break vows, but to make real ones. Vows to honor your full self, to speak when silence would be safer, to feel when numbness would be easier, to burn with truth when the world only offers you the illusion of control, because that is where your power lives, not in denying the fire, but in carrying it consciously. And when you do, you stop fearing the forbidden. You understand it. You respect it. You use it to light the path you were born to walk. No longer afraid, no longer divided, no longer asleep in the role of who you thought you had to be. You are whole now. And a whole human being doesn't need to chase the forbidden because they embody the freedom they once thought they had to find in secret. They no longer seek validation in the shadows. They no longer search for themselves in the arms of what's off limits. They brought every part of themselves to the surface and stood there unflinching, because to be whole is not to be without desire. It's to be in the right relationship with it, to know where it points, to see what it awakens, to feel its pulse without becoming its prisoner. And that is what makes you powerful. Not your ability to suppress, not your ability to pretend, but your ability to integrate, your ability to stand at the edge of your longing, look it in the eye, and say, I see you, I know what you want, but I also know what I need, and I will not betray myself for you or for anyone else, because this is the final transformation of forbidden desire, not its disappearance, but its transcendence. No longer a secret, no longer a threat, but a sacred messenger that guided you back to truth. And that truth, you are not too much. You are not broken. You are not wrong for wanting more. You are simply someone who is no longer willing to live half a life just to be accepted. You are someone who dares to feel fully, who dares to burn without apology, who dares to choose self-respect over silent self-betrayal. You are someone who has faced the forbidden and walked away free. Free not because you denied your desire, but because you understood it. Free not because you silenced your longing, but because you listened to it without flinching. Free not because you killed the fire, but because you learned how to carry it without being consumed. And now you walk differently. You speak from a deeper place. Your energy no longer hides. It commands, because you've been to the underworld of your own psyche. You've met the part of you the world told you to reject. And you didn't run. You stayed. You listened. You healed. And now your presence tells a different story. Not one of control, not one of fear, but one of ownership. You own your passion. You own your pain. You own your contradictions. And in doing so, you become whole. And wholeness is magnetic. It's undeniable. It's rare. Because most people live split. They wear masks. They smile through numbness. They call performance love. They call repression virtue. And then they wonder why they're still hungry. But you are no longer hungry for what's forbidden because you are fed by what is true. You build a new relationship with yourself, one where nothing is exile, nothing is shame, everything is seen. And from that place, you don't chase desire. You embody it. You walk into every room with the gravity of someone who has faced their darkness and turned it into power. Because that's what happens. When you no longer fear your forbidden desires, you become a force, not the kind that dominates, not the kind that conquers, but the kind that radiates truth so intensely that others feel it before you speak. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You don't need to justify your fire. You don't need to ask for permission to be real, because the work has been done in silence, in shadows, in solitude. You stood in front of your own mirror, naked and unguarded, and said, I am not here to be acceptable. I am here to be authentic. And in that moment, you were reborn. Reborn not into perfection, but into presence. Reborn not into someone who never desires the forbidden, but into someone who no longer needs it to feel alive. Because you carry the source of that aliveness now. It's not out there. It's not in them. It's in you, in the way you walk, in the way you choose, in the way you no longer sacrifice your essence for temporary approval. This is the real power, not to resist what you feel, but to rise with it consciously. To feel the heat of temptation and use it as fuel to create something sacred, something aligned, something true. You are no longer afraid of your own depth. You have tasted the fire and survived. And now you live from the flame, not the fear. And when you live from the flame, everything changes. Your relationships deepen, not because they are flawless, but because they are honest. Your boundaries sharpen, not out of defensiveness, but out of clarity. Your presence expands, not to impress, but to embody the truth of who you've become. Because when you stop hiding what's inside, when you stop labeling your hunger as shame, you start living in full alignment. No more split self. No more acting out in secret. No more pretending that comfort is fulfillment. Now you know, desire is not the enemy. It's a compass. The forbidden only ruled you when you were ruled by fear. But fear is gone now, replaced by awareness, by reverence, by the fierce elegance of someone who has stood at the edge of self-destruction and chose self-discovery instead. You chose depth over denial. You chose transformation over suppression. You chose to stop outsourcing your power to things you were taught to fear. And because of that, you are dangerous now, but in the most beautiful way. Dangerous to the systems that survive on your silence. Dangerous to the narratives that keep you small. Dangerous to every voice that told you your truth was too much to carry. You carry it now with grace, with fire, with the quiet conviction of someone who no longer hides from their own soul. And when you no longer hide from your own soul, you become unshakable. Not because you're invincible, but because you're intimate with your own vulnerability. You don't run from the ache. You sit with it. You listen to it. You ask it, what are you here to teach me? And it teaches you everything. It teaches you that the longing you once feared is not your flaw. It's your guide. It teaches you that what you called weakness was actually the gateway to your wildest strength. It teaches you that the forbidden isn't forbidden because it's evil. It's forbidden because it's free. And you were born for that kind of freedom. The kind that doesn't wait for permission. The kind that doesn't bow to shame. The kind that walks through the fire of self-revelation and comes out on the other side. Not burned, but illuminated. This is who you are now. You are no longer at war with your desires. You are in dialogue with them. You are no longer ruled by what you repress. You are led by what you understand. And so when the world whispers, don't go there. You smile because you already have. And you didn't lose yourself. You found yourself in the fire, in the hunger, in the forbidden. You found the truth that was always waiting, beneath the rules, beneath the fear, beneath the silence, and now you walk with that truth as your guide, as your compass, as your home. And this home is not built of safety. It is built of sovereignty, the kind that doesn't flinch when tested, the kind that doesn't collapse in the face of judgment, the kind that says, I will not trade my truth for anyone's approval, because you know now the most dangerous thing in the world is not someone who desires the forbidden. It's someone who desires truth more than they fear rejection. And that's what you've become. Not a slave to impulse, but a student of inner fire. Not someone who hides their hunger, but someone who has learned to wield it with honor. This is the rebirth that forbidden desire offers, if you're brave enough to face it. It doesn't end with indulgence. It ends with integration, with standing fully in yourself without apology, with looking into the mirror of your desire and saying, I see you, I hear you, and I no longer fear what you reveal. That is the work. That is the liberation. That is a love of self most people never dare to reach for. But you did. You walked the long road home through ache, through temptation, through the forest of your own forgotten needs. And you emerged not hollow, not haunted, but whole. So now, when others ask you, why does desire feel so strong when it's forbidden? You don't just give them an answer. You give them a mirror, because you know the strongest desire is the one that leads you back to who you really are. So let the world call it forbidden. Let them point fingers, cast shame, recite their rules. You know the truth now. You've walked through the hunger. You've stared down the seduction. You've stood in front of your own shadow and said, I will not exile you. I will integrate you. And in doing so, you didn't become weaker. You became whole. This is what they never told you. That forbidden desire wasn't meant to destroy you. It was meant to deliver you back to your fire, back to your fullness, back to the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are, when no one is watching. And now you watch yourself not with judgment, but with reverence, because you've earned this clarity. You've paid for it in silence, in shame, in the long nights of pretending to be okay. No more pretending, no more splitting, no more apologizing for the parts of you that refuse to die quietly. You are not dangerous because you feel desire. You are dangerous because you've become conscious of it. And you now use it not to run, not to betray, but to awaken. You don't chase the forbidden anymore. You embody the free. And in doing so, you give the world something rare, something holy, a human being who has nothing left to hide, a soul who burns clean, a truth that no longer asks for permission. That is who you are now, whole, honest, unapologetically alive,